we're still following the same line of God doing God's will, God's way, to find fulfillment in God. And so we're lapping it over from chapter 7. But I want to gather together basically 4 ideas in chapter 8. In chapter 8, verse 1, it says, "Now after this it came about that David defeated the Philistines and subdued them, and David took control of the chief city from the hand of the Philistines. He defeated Moab and measured them in, with a line, making them lie down on the ground, and he measured 2 lines to put to death and 1 full line to keep alive. And the Moabites became servants to David, bringing tribute. He defeated Hadadezer, the son of Rehob, the king of Zobah, and he went to restore his rule at the river. David captured from him 1,700 horsemen, 20,000 foot soldiers. David hamstrung the chariot horses, but reserved enough of them for 100 chariots. When the Arameans of Damascus came to help Hadadezer, the king of Zobah, David killed 22,000 Arameans. Then David put garrisons among the Arameans of Damascus, and the Arameans became servants to David, bringing tribute. And the Lord helped David wherever he went." What you want to do is underline in verse 6, the Lord helped David wherever he went. These are summaries, but one of the things I want you to notice is this. It started with David finding his chief identity in what God was doing in his midst. David went out and he did what he was to do, but as he was fighting and as he was warring, he was building the kingdom that God had promised him. And what's interesting is there was an initial sense of his destiny all the way back from 1 Samuel 16:12, when God said through the prophet that you're going to establish a land and you're going to establish a people and you're going to be a king over them. But here, he starts to see God at work, and everywhere he goes, God is now pulling in these victories. The thing I notice about him is that he feels the responsibility that God placed on him, but he feels that it's a privilege to be God's servant. And you see David pushing forward with that. There is a sense in which, what a wonderful thing God is doing for me. And I think the end of verse 6, the Lord helped David wherever he went, wasn't David decided what to do and then stuck the Lord on it. It's that the Lord brought things to David and David did them and God blessed him. Now, the interesting thing about this passage is that the thing that David had to do was not only be established in the battlefield, but then when you pick up verse 7, David has to use the resources of his initial successes in order to build and forge a kingdom. And from verses 7 to 14, this is David using the resources God gave him. And in verse 7, it says that David took the shields of gold that were carried by the servants of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. From Betah and from Berotai, the cities of Hadadezer, King David took a large amount of bronze. When Toi, king of Hamath, heard that David had defeated all the army of Hadadezer, Toi sent Joram, his son, to King David to greet him and bless him because he had fought against Hadad and defeated him. And Hadadezer had been at war with Toi, and Joram brought with him articles of silver and gold and bronze. And David also dedicated these to the Lord with the gold and silver that he had dedicated from all the nations that he had subdued. From Aram, from Moab, and the sons of Ammon, and the Philistines and Amalek, and from the spoil of Hadadezer, the son of Rehob, the king of Zobah. So David made a name. Now notice it says in the text, for himself, but that's italicized. That's not there. David made a name. It wasn't that he was doing it, God was giving him a name. He put garrisons, and all the Edomites became servants. And the Lord helped David wherever he went. Underline the end of verse 14. Draw a line between the end of verse 14 and the end of verse 6. The Lord helped David wherever he went. And the Lord helped David wherever he went. And the Lord helped David wherever he went. I put a box around 15. David reigned over all Israel, and David administered justice and righteousness for all his people. So you see this kind of epitome of the organization, and as David followed God, God filled David's bank account. God filled David's quotient for what he needed to build a kingdom. And you end up with, by the end of this, Joab, son of Zeruiah, was over the army. Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was the recorder. Zadok, the son of Achitub, and Ahimelech, the son of Abiathar, were priests. And Sariah was a secretary. Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and David's son were chief ministers. And you end chapter 8 with a sense of organization, supply, connection, stability. You've got all this going on, and now you really see a sense of fulfillment. And this is where I get you to chapter 9, and there's a tender moment. There's something tender about chapter 9. This is a personal triumph. Chapter 8's all about political triumphs, but there's a personal triumph in chapter 9, and it's between David and a weak or lame son of Jonathan. David loved Jonathan, and David wanted to show something good to Jonathan's family. And so it begins, David said, "Is there anyone left to the household of Saul?" He's looking for somebody to bless. "Is there anybody left to the household of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" I think that David looked at his bank account being flush, looked at his kingdom being built, and missed Jonathan. I think he just missed a friend. And he thought, is there something I could do to go forward to bless? One of the things that is interesting here is God positions somebody of weakness in his life while he's at his strongest. Let me suggest to you that one of the greatest blessings of your life will be whenever God is blessing you greatly, find someone that looks like they need a blessing. I'm telling you, nothing will add to your life more than to bring in someone who has nothing when God is pouring it on you. You will go through times in your life when you will be broke, but you will go through times in your life when you're not. And when you have, if you give away from what you have, you will find incredible, deep, rich blessing from it. So verse 2 says, there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziva. And they called him to David, and the king said to him, "Are you Ziva?" And he said, "I am, your servant." The king said, "Is there not anyone of the household of Saul to whom I may show kindness of God?" Ziva said to the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan, who is crippled in both feet." So the king said to him, "Where is he?" Ziva said to the king, "Behold, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lo-Devar." Now, when someone says thank you in Hebrew, todah, or thank you very much, todah rabbah, you can reply, a Lo-Devar. It's nothing. Lo-Devar means the place that's nothing. That's literally what it means. So here's a guy who has fallen from the house of the king, grandson of the former, now dead king, whose dad died in a battle, whose granddad died in a battle, who's crippled and lives in nowhere. He is the original nowhere man living with nothing. And when you get down to verse 5, so you sort of see, can everybody see why verse 5 is important as a contrast after chapter 8? And David got gold, and David got slaves, and David took countries, and David got bronze, and David got shields, and Mephibosheth was lame and lived in Nowhereville. And that's what you're supposed to feel. And David is looking past all the good stuff that's stacked around him and saying, who can I bless? Verse 6, King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lo-Devar. Mephibosheth, the casting off of the shame, right? The ending of the shame. The son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and prostrated himself. And David said, "Mephibosheth," and he said, "Here is your servant." What's interesting is Machir was apparently some kind of wealthy benefactor for Mephibosheth. And he comes from this town in Gilead, and he gets there, and he has no idea. What do you think Mephibosheth thought was going to happen next? I'm thinking he's dying. And David said to him, "Do not fear. I will surely show kindness to you for the sake of your father Jonathan. And I will restore to you all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you shall eat at my table regularly." One of the things that he does is David makes a deliberate choice to become a father to this struggling young man. He's filled with blessing. He's got a household filled. He's got a bank account full, and he looks for somebody to bless. And he says, Jonathan was my friend. I miss my friend. I'm going to bless the household of Saul. I'm going to bless you. The other thing I think that is interesting is that he expresses openly some feelings of warmth. Don't worry, I will show kindness to you. He makes it clear to him, you're not here to die. I have a desire to show love to you. Then I think what's interesting is he spends time with him. He says, you will eat at my table regularly. Look, if you want to bless someone's life, one of the things you can do is find the person who doesn't have what you have, is express openly that your intent is to be a blessing to them, and then spend time with them. And the truth is that in verse 8 it says, again he prostrated himself, what is your servant that you should regard a dead dog like me? I've seen this before. It was when David was talking to God. David sees humility, and David knows it when he sees it. But what's interesting too is that obviously Mephibosheth had been taught respect. He was not walking around going, I should be prince and you shouldn't be king. How easy that would have been for him to feel the son of privilege, the grandson of the former king. Instead of being a cowering person like Ishbosheth, instead of being an arrogant person like Avner, Mephibosheth said, I'm nothing. It could be the lameness in his legs actually blessed his life. I would mark that. I really believe that one of the reasons that God blessed him here is, and by the way, there's quite a long story to him. He's coming back again for another story. But God blessed him, and I think one of the greatest blessings of his life was he didn't become arrogant because his body was broken. Let me just say this in verse 9. It goes on and says, Then the king called Saul's servant Ziba and said to him, all that belonged to Saul and to all his house I have given to your master's grandson. You and your sons and your servants shall cultivate the land for him, and you shall bring in the produce so that your master's grandson may have food. Nevertheless, Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall eat at my table regularly. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. And Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so your servant will do. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table as one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah. And all who lived in the house of Ziba were servants to Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he ate at the king's table regularly. Now he was lame in both feet. So he's trying to show you there's a contrast here. The contrast is, physically, he wasn't up to it. He was lame in both of his feet. But God was blessing him through David. And David was gaining through the blessing of this one that was broken. Now, you get to 10, and we've got just a few minutes, but you get to 10, and what you see is there was a pattern of learning to accept God's blessing and to live for God's blessing and to walk with God in 8, and in 9 there was this personal touch of that blessing, and by the time you get to 10 there is a procedural matter that has to be taken care of. Okay, now you're the leader, Dave. What does that mean? What does God expect you to know to carry out leadership? Because chapter 10, David learned in battles with neighbors and a tapestry of daily leadership choices. But when you wade through the pool of leadership with him, you're going to see that if we discern the central lessons God taught him, we're going to get something from this text that it's more than it appears. Chapter 10 offers us, I'm going to call it 7 specific lessons, and I'm going to walk through them quickly. Okay? Now, let's frame it this way. Chapter 10, because this is the end of David's big high water mark. God defined and God illustrated what leadership techniques are. So let's just see if we can find 7 of these as we walk through. The first one is in 10:1 and 2. Great leaders are values-driven leaders. Because you know what you mean doesn't mean they know what you mean. Even if your heart's right, their heart might not be. You can't always judge your performance by the reaction of other people. So your actions have to be values driven. You can't just get what's right and wrong from the crowd. You have to bring leadership. That means you have to know the difference between right and wrong. Take a look at verses 1 and 2. Somebody read 10, 1 and 2 nice and loud.
Now it happened afterwards that the king of the Ammonites died, and Hanun his son became king in his place. Then David said, I will show kindness to Hanun the son of Nahash, just as the father showed kindness to me. So David sent some of his servants to console him concerning his father.
What's the value? A kindness, a reciprocated kindness. He's honoring the new prince. Why? Because his dad honored David when he became new king. So what he's doing is turning it around. Now, right in the middle of that, I stopped you mid-sentence because in verses 3 and 4, great leaders are discerning leaders. They're values-driven, but they're discerning. Read me 3 and 4, Spencer.
The princes of the Ammonites said to Hanun their lord, Do not think that David is honoring your father because he has sent counselors to you. Has David not sent his servants to you in order to search the city, to spy it out and overthrow it? So Hanun took David's servants and shaved off half of their beards and cut off their garments in the middle as far as their hips and sent them away.
There's an old saying that when the well is poisoned, the water is bitter. Somebody poisoned the heart of this prince. Nahash died, Hanun became the leader, and they whispered in Hanun's ear, David is doing this for a bad reason, and that embittered him. And from that bitter water, he embarrasses and humiliates David's men. What's the form of humiliation? Shirtless and beardless. He tore off their shirts and tore off their beards. And what David has to do is he has to discern. He has to be able to read the signs. Now, verse 5, nice and loud, because great leaders are also empathetic leaders. They empathize.
When they told it to David, he sent to them, for the men were greatly humiliated. And the king said, Stay at Jericho until your beards grow, and then return.
See, David made a provision for the guys because of their embarrassment. Why? Because they went there on David's behest. No reason to bring those men back and have them suffer humiliation. Let them stay at Jericho, stay for a while, grow their beards back out, then they can come back. Now, it may not matter to you, but it mattered to them, and it mattered to David, and David knew to be a good leader, he had to empathize with how they felt. It's not about how you feel as the leader, it's about how the person felt. And David understood that. By the way, David understood or learned that great leaders are proactive leaders. And that's what I see in 6 through 8. Great leaders are proactive leaders. Verse 6 says, Now when the sons of Ammon saw that they had become odious to David, the sons of Ammon sent and hired the Arameans of Beit Rehov and the Arameans of Zovah, 20,000 foot soldiers, and the king of Ma'achah with 1,000 men, and the men of Tob with 12,000 men. David heard of it. He sent Joab and all the army, the mighty men. And the sons of Ammon came out and drew up in battle array at the entrances of the city, while the Arameans of Zovah and of Rehov and of the men of Tov and Ma'achah were by themselves in the field. That's interesting that what he has to figure out is Dave sent Joab against Ammon, who hired the Arameans. Okay, that's what's going on here. Now look, most problems work out because you work at them. They don't work out by themselves. So a problem is brewing. Some people have humiliated publicly David, and others get the idea that now they can chime in and attack. That's what's happening here. David has to have a sense of what to do. People will bandwagon onto a problem until you deal with it. And so what he does is he becomes proactive. But you know what else he is? In verses 9 and 10, he's a delegating leader, because good leaders learn to delegate. He can't do it all himself. You're not going to be able to be a king and run around like a one-armed paper hanger doing everything by yourself. And so in verses 9 and 10, it says, When Joab saw that the battle was set against him in front and in the rear, he selected from the choice men of Israel and arrayed them against the Arameans. But the remainder of the people he placed in the hand of Abishai his brother, and he arrayed them against the sons of Ammon. David turned over to Joab. Joab turned over to his brother half the troops. Everybody's learning here that good leaders know how to delegate and divide the task. You can't do everything, so you've got to get some help. And in doing that, both David is getting help and Joab is getting help. Verse 11 says that great leaders are team builders. Great leaders are team builders. He said, if the Arameans are too strong for me, then you come and help me. But if the sons of Ammon are too strong for you, then I will come and help you. He said, we got a team here, and we got you facing this way and me facing that way, and our back is to each other. Whoever's lacking, send a message to the other, and we'll pull up extra men. And what we'll do is we'll keep moving back and forth, and we'll keep pressure on both people. We should get squashed in the center, but we're not gonna. We're gonna fight with each other and for each other. Can I tell you that verses 12 through the rest of the chapter, great leaders are tenacious. They're tenacious. Quitters are unreliable and ultimately dangerous in leadership positions. Paul's going to tell Timothy to choose faithful and able men. Some of you are going to choose to spend a great deal of time discipling people who are unfaithful, and you're going to find you're frustrated. Great leaders are tenacious. Tenacious leaders read the situation well. They put everything on the line, and they press and press and press until it's done. And if you read verses 12 all the way through the end of the chapter, here's what you'll see. You'll see that in verse 12, the message goes out from Joab, be strong, let us show ourselves courageous for the sake of our people, for the cities of our God. May the Lord do what is good in his sight. Joab and all the people who were with him drew near to the battle of the Arameans, and they fled before him. When the sons of Ammon saw that the Arameans fled, they also fled before Abishai and entered the city. Then Joab returned from fighting against the sons of Ammon and came to Jerusalem. This is a great moment. They've all delegated, but this is the moment that is going to cause the downfall of David. Why? Everything was working exactly as it should. But in delegation, you're not supposed to vacate your post. When you delegate to the other guy, you don't drop everything and run off. And David is about to do that. Now, just remember this. At the end of the day, everything depends on leadership, and the quality of the leader determines much about the impact of the work. So when you read chapter 10, you read the apex of delegated, proactive, empathetic leadership. And that sets you up for chapter 11 right after lunch, where we're going to come back and David's going to go splat like a bug on a windshield.